Welcome back to my channel. This is Stephen Dupree of NowEnergetics.com based on Ewan method. And today we're going to go over numerical profiling. It's kind of a big area of Ewan method. It's something we use all the time. We don't talk about the various ways that we use numerical profiling, but more than just looking at strong and weak, we really need to look at the different ways that we can measure things. It's very important in any kind of energy work to be able to measure something beforehand and also measure things afterwards. And so this is kind of the article that I wrote quite some time ago, but I've updated it now and again and tried to keep more and more current with what I use day to day, things that I found over time, things that Dr. Ewan has talked about, but not necessarily written down. So I think this is one of the, kind of the key documents to look at and probably a key video to watch to really kind of supercharge your use of the method. And a lot of folks without profiling, sometimes they get discouraged because they can't measure the results they've gotten. So the notion is that, maybe whatever you did, the person got no results or whatever, they can't notice a difference. And what numerical profiling allows you to do is kind of measure that you actually did something useful. You could measure, let's say that the person improved 20% or you shifted the person 35%. So you kind of can put a pin in it and say, well, I made some improvement for the person. Now, whether they perceived it all or not, you could use numerical profiling to see how much they perceive. Maybe they perceive 20% of the 35% that you improved them. So just knowing that and knowing that you always have some place to go, you're never at a loss with numerical profiling because you can always measure where you are. And even what's done in the past, you could actually measure before. You could roll back the clock and measure what someone's energy was up to the point that they met you and they had a session with you, as an example, or whether you're working on yourself, you could do the same thing. Where was I before I started clearing today at 3 o'clock? You could do all kinds of that kind of measurement. So let's see how far we get. I like these videos to be somewhat short, but we'll see how far we go because there's so many different ways to numerically profile. And we're going to get into some details here and some examples that are going to be interesting. So I can't believe I found this image here. It's exactly what we do with numerical profiling. We're trying to really, I call it lasso. So you get a number, whether you count up or to a number or something like that, you see what the effect is 1,000,000% or something like that. So these are all ways of profiling, but it's all trying to get a lasso around it. And a lasso, in this case, it'd be kind of like a sphere. So you kind of like lassoing it with a sphere. You're trying to get all those elements to strengthen and delete them and delete the effects of them. So that's really what numerical profiling is. So it's we use the energetic testing of strong and weak, of course, with numerical profiling to really get very, very accurate answers here. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about getting very accurate answers and getting them very quickly. So we're not going to spend a lot of time, but we can really, really know where we're at every time we strengthen something. So like I say, here is the Swiss Army knife. You could use it with anything, the strong and weak. You add the numerical profiling, you really have a very powerful Swiss Army knife kind of tool to use anywhere, and actually with any modality. You don't have to just use it with the Ewan method. Energetic testing is very useful. So, and the other thing that I like to tell people is that there's way too much seriousness in this kind of work. So you need to even look at energetic testing or numerical profiling. It's just a game of numbers, so you don't have to get too serious about it. But at the same time, you're getting more accurate answers than anybody ever could get with their insight. And you could still have some fun with it, so don't be so stuck on the number you get versus the number someone else gets. The people tend to, when they work in groups or something, they worry about the number they get. I wouldn't worry about that too much. Get the number that you get, because a lot of times the energy is shifting all the time. So the number you got is different than the person that had a insight 10 minutes ago, so there's nothing wrong with that. So the way I've set up this particular document and the way I'm going to talk through it is there's very different elements to look at first. Like I said, it's a very powerful way to lasso and delete things in the Ewan method. There are related articles here that you should probably look at. Energetic testing, of course, is the beginning to learn what strong and weak is, how to test for energy, so on. And there's a whole section in the channel about Ewan method basics. So there's 5 or 6 different videos there that you can look at: clearing perception blocks, where do I start, so on. So that's part of it. We want to get neutral first before we do any kind of energetic testing. We want to make sure that we're neutral to judgment, any kind of criticism, choosing. A lot of folks can be weak to certain numbers too. So you may not be able to profile certain things because you don't like even numbers, as an example. So usually that gets cleared first or second time you have a session, but it's a very strange thing, but you very often find that people are very weak to certain numbers. So you have to sort of ferret that out with your insight. And that'll allow you to do, and even if it's your own weaknesses, you ferret those things out to have a better and more accurate numbers. So the way I've structured kind of this document and the way I'm going to structure the presentation here is going over basic profiling, and then all these many different ways that we can look at profiling using numbers. And I've got very interesting different ways of doing it. And you've probably thought of doing these things in the past, and you've probably done this in your life before you ever knew about Ewan method or energetic testing or anything. But believe it or not, using some of these basic elements can help you really understand and get very, very useful answers and get shifts very, very quickly. So let's look at the basics of basic profiling first, the comparing two things. That's kind of your basic strong and weak. Right? You're comparing two things and you go with what goes weak. Is it inside, outside? Is it physical, non-physical? One of those will go weak. So that's the comparing two things. And so I kind of have that example here. A common concept is just comparing two things. So in this, kind of a classic example of something that someone might present as a story is I have all these issues with, I fail at all kinds of things. So it's a success failure kind of duality, and person's always complaining they fail, right? That's their issue. They fail. They want to succeed, and they fail. So you check the energy, and you can figure out that success is probably the issue that weakens them more than the failure. But you can also compare, and it's not, like I say here, it's not always clear cut, but there are many different ways you can test for this. One of the ways of comparing is rolling back the clock. That's a really interesting way, so that regardless of where you are in the here and now, you can roll back, what was the energy 10 minutes ago? What was the energy 20 years ago? So that's a very, very useful tool, and you still get a very accurate answer. So that's really, really important. So turning back the clock, you'll be using that all the time. You sometimes want to measure someone else's work before they came to you. If someone had some other energy work, you could do a profiling to see how much they had been cleared up until the point they came to you. So for a particular issue, let's say they have some issue with a pain or something, or some chronic thing, and they come to you and you say, well, it looks like all the things you've done to this point, you're 15% clear for this particular issue. You have 85% to go. So that's a good thing to be able to tell the person that that's what, that's where they're at before you get started, and it's good for you to know as a practitioner, that's where you're starting. You're not starting from zero. You're not starting from a train wreck. You're starting from, it looks like 15% of this is cleared, so that's kind of good to know. One of the other ways you can profile is not just using numbers, counting numbers, but having sort of a list of things. And, kind of what you have there with a list is there's sort of top to bottoms are sort of numerically ordered. So you can look at, in this example we have here is the leading life supports. There's 6 leading life supports: fitness, relationships, money, finance, career, purpose, time / less aging, and health. So we can even go through the list like that, whether we do it numerically or just based on, the idea, the concept. You can do the same thing, which goes the weakest. So that's kind of a profiling right there, where you're not just comparing 2 things, but you're comparing many things, right? And you could add to this list anything else but that. So a lot of folks will say, well, it's this or that, but it could be this or that and everything but those things, right? So that's a good profiling to do as well. So here's a good example here where someone says they have a relationship problem, and you go through, which one is the first weakness here. If you're using the leading life supports, let's say you're not going to intuit, but let's say you use this list here, and you say, well, show me the first weakness here. So, and what comes up is career purpose. And you can intuit from that point, what the next weakness is and so on. So that's one way to do it. Use a list. That's a very good way to do it. And anytime you do any of these things, you're looking at, what's the weakest thing really. Anytime you compare 2 things, you're really trying to go in a direction of the weakest thing. It may be subtle. It may not be 90-10, percent wise. So you want to go in the way, in the direction of the weakest thing. So there are many different ways that you can profile using numbers. So we can use the order of things, much like we did here with a list of items, the leading life supports, let's say. But you can also use the order significance, which is, it can be kind of powerful too, because you can say, based on a list, you could say that the third thing is the weakest thing. And let's say the 5th thing is the second weakest thing. So you have those 2 things, number 3 on the list, number 5 on the list. And then you may compare 3 and 5, and you count up from 1, and you say, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, well, 3, the third thing is really 10 times worse than the 5th thing. They're both weak. The third thing is still first, but the third thing is 10 times worse than the 5th thing that's weak. So that's really important to be able to profile in that way. So there's sort of an example here by order significance. And that's a good way to do it as well. And you can kind of read through the examples here. I think it's might be better to read through it than to talk through it, but counting up to a number 4 is what we use all the time. Looking for percentages, looking for numbers, what's your central core right at this moment, 50, 60, 70, 73%, so that's counting up to a number. 73 goes weak. That's numerical profiling. So on top of using strong and weak, you're using the tool to get a very accurate answer where you are at all times, right? So that's what that's all about. I have a good example here that comes up a lot with folks that are really in the alternative health world and the energy work fields. They often attract people that are worried about everything in their life pretty much, but they have no idea what's significant to them and what's not significant to them. The most common ones I see is like mercury, or people complain about fluoride and all these different things. Well, I mean, it could be, but it's important to find out using numerical profiling where it is on the list. And here's an example here where someone's talking about mercury toxicity, and really number 1 is, it could be the thing that comes up first for them might be non-physical, but let's just say we're going to go along with this example here and say, well, let's look at mercury. Where is that on the list of things that are toxic to you physically, let's say? And it comes up 37. So there's 36 other things that you got to look at before you ever worry about mercury. So regardless of what the person thinks, they're kind of stuck on that answer, and it's really not the right answer for them. It's the right answer, 36 elements from now, but it's not the right answer now. And it's good to know that, right? So you don't have to spend your whole life researching things online that don't, and you may find that your internal toxicity is worse than your anything that you can ingest. That may go the weakest, and that may be number one on the list actually physically, right? So these are good things to know. It tells you how to do that here. We already talked about this one here, where something is how many times weaker than the next thing. That's really important. It's important to know you're going to test all kinds of things that are weak. It's whether they're significant or not, whether they're really affecting you or not. So make sure that you work on things that really affect you. So here's a good example here of using a triad to lasso, for deletion. So here we use the life problems triad of issues, triggers, and choices, and we don't get too specific about it. Again, we're numerically profiling, but we're not trying to get too specific. So we'll say, well, we're at the end of the demonstration or something like that, and we say, well, life problems for you is 200,000, and you're basically counting up from factors of 10 until something goes weak. And in this case, it's 200,000. So they have 200,000 life problems, and we can say it's affecting you 10%, 100,000, 10,000, whatever. In this case, it's almost infinite for this person. And then now you have a lasso of both the 200,000 and the infinite effect, and you're going to strengthen them to it and delete the effects of that down to 0 minus infinity, all parts of their being, body, mind, spirit, all the way down to their quantum and all the spaces as well, right? So that's a really good technique to use here. Using a shape, in this case it was issues, triggers, and choices, the life problems triad. And you're deleting things in that order. And we can have things, subtle things like geometric foundations going weak and triads and different shapes. And you have to know a little bit about geometry there. And you're just looking to see if it goes weak. I mean, it's going to come up not too often, but if it does, you may want to strengthen internal dynamics, external influences, that kind of thing. Percentages, we use this all the time. And it's important to know that because so much of what we do isn't one thing that's 100%. And when you intuit that particular issue and clear it, your problem's 100% gone. More likely there are layers of the onion. So you may have something 90-10, physical, non-physical. You may have 5 issues that are 20% of the problem each. So it's not always one big button, is the way I call it. And perfectionists more likely be drawn to this peeling the onion back quite a bit. So it's okay. So you can strengthen yourself for being a perfectionist too. So you take a more general profiling and general strengthening too. You want to be as general as possible. You don't want to have to get specific unless, you want to mostly get strengthenings that are general in the best case scenario. So here we are with percentages. Here's another example here with profiling based on physical, non-physical, inside, outside, local or referred. So all kinds of, this is kind of the typical way we do it with percentages here. I don't want to go too much over that one. We already talked about multiples. The third thing is 10 times worse than the fifth thing on the list, that type of thing. And you just count up as multiples. And this is the example here. Something weakens your energy, but success weakens your energy 4 times more than a failure. So somebody with a success failure problem, they said, okay, I fail at a lot of things. Well, success was a little weak. It wasn't, strong. It was a little weak. But in this case, we found that success is 4 times worse than failure. So failure was also a little bit weak, right? So success was weak, failure was weak, and you want to measure the two and see what the difference is. You're going to clear both of them anyway with some neutrality, but so that's a really important one too. I kind of say this, that don't look for the big button you kind of want the primary weakness, but you're not always going to get it, because it's, what's primary? If it's 51%, it's primary, but what if you have 5 things that are 20%? What's primary? Well, you just go from one to the next, right? So it's not always a big button. Power of infinity, we use that occasionally when someone has an effect that's beyond infinite. You say infinite to the power of 2, to the power of 3, to the power of 4, see what goes weak. Because some people have issues that are beyond infinite, kind of either influence or effect, and you want to still be able to lasso it. And by counting up and getting that actual number, you're actually doing a deletion at that level, right? So you're doing a very complete deletion. So that's number 7. So this is kind of an interesting one, anonymously or blindly. I'll just say that in general, when you're not sure of how you're going to get an insight, or if you think that some prior work that someone does applies to a situation, you can use this kind of anonymous profiling, what John did the other day type of thing. Or, it could even be in a different language. You could think about a page that you saw that someone wrote a really good article in a particular clearing, and you're just going to apply that to the situation. So that's kind of an anonymous, blind kind of usage of prior work. So you're always able to do that. This particular one has got several examples here, but that's a pretty good one. And as we said before, we want to be very general at first, and we only want to get specific when we absolutely have to. Using an unknown. Sometimes I use this teaching because people always think you have to come up with a number. Sometimes you can come up with n and let the universe fill it in. So that's kind of this example here, because n is the number. Whatever the number is, you're just going to call it n, but you're not going to actually count up to it. You're just going to say, well, let's put n equals all the issues, triggers, and choices, and we'll just delete n. So that works too. Prior work we already talked about. So even work that, say, a good practitioner or Dr. Ewan has in a seminar, you can just take that work and that energy and apply it to the person and just say apply. And that'll also work. So that type of profile is just, we talked about that earlier, but it's just using prior work. So I actually thought this was going to go on longer than this particular presentation, but you get the idea that you want to be able to play with the numbers. A lot of this, in case you didn't kind of get the general theme here, there's so many different ways to play with numbers. And even to the extent that, you're profiling with some unknown number that, issues, triggers, and choices, let's call it n, and we're going to delete n, so that's about as general as you could possibly get and still get a result for somebody. And so use all of these tools that you have. The profiling is very, very important as you progress with the method and you get clearer with your perception of strong and weak. You put numerical profiling in there and you're going to be head and shoulders above most of the other modalities out there that have no way of actually quantifying or measuring things. They're not like an accountant, down to the penny kind of way, but it's just, you're always trying to make improvements. And this type of profiling allows you to know where you're at without being too anal about it. You're going to get results with this, and you got to strengthen you that you're not going to be so anal about it like an accountant, down to the penny. So use it as a tool, but at the same time, have some fun with it. And that's when you're going to get better results because you're going to be more neutral about the numbers you get. So that's numerical profiling. It's a really important part of the work that we do. And I hope you have fun learning to play with numbers. I always give the example of picking somebody down at the Starbucks, to try to figure out, play with the numbers, play with their central core, numerically profile their central core. That person's 58% over there. What about all these 4 people in line? Let's average them out. It's 42%. So you're just trying to get a number, right? You're not trying to strengthen them or anything like that. Because I don't believe in being a busybody, but there's nothing wrong with using kind of the situation to practice your skills and kind of improve your insight and use numerical profiling more and more, and it will definitely improve your insight and your results. So we'll leave it at that for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.